Welcome to Around Town, featuring what's happening here in the greater Concord area. I'm your host, Patten, and as I begin, again, I want to say happy Thanksgiving, oh brother. Happy Easter and happy Passover to all my Jewish viewers, and also happy Greek Orthodox Easter. For the first time in ages, the Greek Orthodox is the same time as ours, so that's good. And but here we go now again, and we already had one guy who announced his role for running for governor for next year. That was Steve Marchand, and now, but today we've got Max Abramson on, and of course Max is a very good friend of mine. He is a former state rep, and he ran for governor as a libertarian last year. Of course, he didn't make it, but he had a good showing for the Libertarian Party, because now they're a legitimate party. But
hey, we were a legitimate party before.
Yeah, that
we
was
just
years
didn't have
ago.
major party status.
Yeah, I know it. Now you have it. But so, what, you staying libertarian, or what are you going to do?
I finally went into the town clerk's office a couple of weeks ago and registered as a libertarian.
Again?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would. You know, when I ran the first time as for governor, you had to switch to undeclared.
So, are you going to go back trying for the House again?
I really have to work. I don't think that I can get a work schedule that works with state representative, but you know, I'll try, but I'll have to see what goes on. I think that, I mean, as you know, I grew up from a conservative Republican family, and my family's been Republican since, for all I know, Abraham Lincoln. And but I think that there's been a strong feeling amongst the rank and file Republicans that the party's really kind of going off on a tangent. The national GOP is supporting an interventionist foreign policy. Of course, we're against, I don't believe in meddling in the affairs of other countries. I believe that national defense is supposed to be for defense. Interfering with the marketplace. Another example was corporate welfare. The Republican budget had $114 billion in corporate welfare. This is at the federal level. And the Democrat budget had $115 billion in corporate welfare spending. And there's absolutely no public support for it, but yet these politicians, these members of Congress, go to these big political donors on Wall Street and Goldman Sachs and Big Pharma and whatnot, and they trade political favors for you know, everything else. So I'm a believer in free market competition, as usual, and but I don't believe in any of the. I don't believe that it's right that Big Pharma is using the FDA's approval process to block competition so they can overcharge us for pharmaceuticals. An $8 bottle of prescription drugs in Canada costs $80 here in the U.S. because it's taxed, subsidized, and regulated to death. Another one is airlines using the FAA's regulatory process to keep smaller airlines out of smaller airports. So that's another example of cronyism. It's not capitalism, it's crony capitalism, and that's what I think we're getting from the two major political parties right now. And it's just something that I can't believe in.
Well,
I don't support.
I can tell you, all I know is I was so sick of politics last fall. Glad it was over with. Although I'm not happy with the current administration. I'm worried that there's too many from that family that's all of a sudden finding positions in the White House. I think that has to stop. I mean, I know on the previous show we were on, I had on with the guests who were talking about that, and I said, you know, there's only one president that I can think of in my age group that had a family member in a position. That was John F. Kennedy, who had Robert as his Attorney General. But I don't ever remember all these other presidents having all these family members in there.
And that was a big controversy back in the days.
Yeah.
This is before you were born. When John F. Kennedy was president, there was a lot of criticism of him putting Robert Kennedy in as Attorney General.
I was born there.
Or no, this was 1960.
I was born in 1952.
Oh, well, okay.
I'll be 65 this year.
All right. Well, I
remember. I don't remember a lot about that, but I do remember the names. There.
Okay. Well, I misjudged your age then, but I
Thank you.
thought. So So that was a big controversy. I thought, and a lot of longtime Democrats felt that John F. Kennedy was the last, what they call real Democrat or real liberal progressive, who was elected to the White House. And on the Republican side, a lot of people are feeling that, maybe Eisenhower or possibly Reagan was the last real conservative Republican to get elected. And what we've been seeing is a small number of dynastic families, basically the Bush machine and the Eastern liberal establishment. And it'll go back and forth between, one of them runs as a Republican, one of them runs as a Democrat, one runs as a Republican, and it's just been, people were looking at the election process earlier and they thought it was, okay, it's going to be Bush, Clinton, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Clinton, forever.
Didn't happen.
And I thought Obama might be different, but he spent every single day of his administration, 8 consecutive years, every single day we were at war with these other countries, and instead of bringing the troops home from Iraq, instead of ending those wars, Bush's wars in the Middle East, he actually expanded them, and he expanded them to 7 more countries.
We're deeper now in there. With Trump in there, we're deeper into these countries in war now. So I see more troops going in.
So you've got the Wall Street Party, basically with its 2 factions, and it doesn't matter who you elect. So now I have a lot of Republican friends who thought that Donald Trump was going to be different. And I said, he stood up at the presidential debate, and he admitted that he bribed the Clintons, that he'd give the Clintons hundreds of thousands of dollars and go back 2 or 3 years later, and they would do whatever favor he wanted, and he admitted it. And that's felony level bribery. And that should have disqualified, obviously, Donald Trump, if not the Clintons, right out. And people still showed up and voted for them. And I just, is that level of bribery, it certainly didn't start with Bill Clinton. But is that level of bribery going to be the way that American politics works from now on?
What makes me laugh is all the promises that Trump made during the campaign, all the bad mouthing he did with Russia, with China, and now look at it. He's and come on, so far Germany has stood up to him.
He was for single payer, then he's against it. He was for the assault weapons ban, then he's against it. He was pro-choice, then he's pro-life. And I saw him flip-flop on issue after issue after issue, and I finally said, you know what? If I know what a conservative is, old-fashioned as conservatism can be, it's about, you make your position and you stick with it, and you believe in what you believe in, and you stand for your principles. And a lot of voters who are not conservative have voted for some very conservative Republicans, like Ronald Reagan. A lot of Democrats voted for Ronald Reagan because they didn't necessarily agree with him on everything, but he did at least stand for what he believed in. Same thing with Bernie Sanders. A lot of conservatives supported Bernie Sanders because he consistently stood up for...
I haven't heard much about him lately. He's been quiet.
He did. He had a good bill in that one thing I agreed with Senator, now he's Senator Sanders, and that is that he would have allowed you, remember what I said, the $80 for prescription drugs in the U.S., it's only $8 in Canada. He would have allowed you to go up to Canada, buy prescription drugs there, and bring them back into the country. So you had Republicans and Democrats who voted for it, then you had Republicans and Democrats who voted against it, and it lost by 1 vote in the Senate, and that was the end of it.
I don't know. I'm just really very, very upset with it. I just don't know where it's going to end.
I talked to folks, older folks, who they're getting $1,000 and some a month from Social Security, and their entire because of the prescription drug entitlement program and everything else, and all the cronyism and protectionism, has driven the cost of prescription drugs through the roof. And so they're spending $1,800 a month on prescription drugs. And I said, well, how much is your Social Security check? And they would say $1,800 a month. So I said, all the cronyism and what's going on in Washington, D.C., they've basically stolen your Social Security check. They've stolen your Social Security, all of it, not just a little bit. They've taken the whole thing. You've got people make $1,100 a month on Social Security. It's all being wiped out on prescription drugs and Medicare Part B premiums and out-of-pocket expenses. They're being wiped out by health care.
I don't know. I don't know what to think of this mess, I can tell you. I just think I don't know. The thing that bothers me is I have never, since I'm old enough to know things on TV, I have never seen in this country, every weekend it seems like there's a protest. We never had that before. Every weekend there's a protest.
I
in
thought
DC.
you said you were around in the 60s.
Well, I was, but I wasn't
were big
watching
protests.
I wasn't watching totally that. I mean, I was only in junior high school at that point.
But I think when people take to the streets and they're smashing cars and smashing Starbucks and they're lying down in the middle of the freeway blocking traffic, I don't think that they're winning friends and allies when they try to bring about change that way. You know, you and I mean, long before I got elected to State House, I would go up to the State House and I would testify and say, this is why I think we need to change the law. One of my big things is drug policy. You've had a lot of conservative commentators like Thomas Sowell, Bill Buckley, who passed away a few years ago, George Will, more and more are saying, hey, we need to end the war on drugs. And I think the reason is, you know, here's an example where the war on drugs has been going on for 50 years. It's basically the Soviet Union's drug policy. And it didn't work in the Soviet Union. And all these Western European countries have abandoned it, and they're now moving to what's called harm reduction. So instead of putting people in prison where they get involved with violent prison gangs, and you've got more drugs available in prison than you do on the street. So you have people who've never used drugs before, never used addictive drugs, and they're living in the most stressful, horrible environment. What happens? A lot of them end up on drugs, and then they come out drug addicts. And now you've got another problem, because they're tied in with more career criminals, and they're drug addicts. Now they've got a problem, and every time they step up the war on drugs, crime gets worse, not better. We've had drug use more than triple in this country. We went from fewer than 20 million drug users in America to over 60 million, and we're losing about, 10 or 11 Granite Staters a week to the drug crisis. And everyone is saying more funding, more borrowing, more prisons, more. But yet, if you look at Portugal, Switzerland, Germany, Holland, Belgium, Ireland, Britain, all of these Western countries are saying, hey, prisons and arrests aren't working. You can't arrest your way out of this. So it didn't work in the Soviet Union. It's not working in America. So now they're all moving to, and Canada is too, moving to offering treatment, recovery support, employment support, peer support, and they're expanding the list of options that are available. I talked to you last time on this show about diamorphine clinics and ibogaine clinics, and diamorphine clinics weren't meant to be a cure, wasn't meant to be a treatment. That the diamorphine clinics in Switzerland were meant to be like a nicotine patch for heroin addicts. So you have these heroin addicts who've been through treatment 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and treatment wasn't going to work anymore. So they said, well, let's try diamorphine, which is it's also the same as it's in the same line as codeine, morphine, heroin, diamorphine. It's just that diamorphine's the clearest one. It comes in a plastic medical bottle like that, and they'll go in 1 to 3 times a day and get a very small injection. It's not enough to get high off of, but it turns out it's enough to calm the cravings. It's just like a nicotine patch, but you can't administer diamorphine in a patch. It has to be.
So what do you think about all this talk about election fraud in New Hampshire?
I've seen it. Ed Nail of Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers, the day after one of these elections, he sent out 8,100, that's 8,100 thank you postcards to same-day registrants. They came in, they registered same day, and they voted using some address. So he sent 8,100 postcards out. 4,400 of those postcards came back as undeliverable. And he still talks to people who say, you know...
Now who's this again?
That's Ed Nail, Naile, I think. He's one of the famous taxpayers.
And he ran for what?
I don't think he ever runs
Oh.
for office. But 8,100 postcards. So 4,400 of those, they used fake addresses
Yeah.
to vote in our elections. Now we know it's both parties. It's Republicans and Democrats, activists who are doing that because they're coming in from across state lines and they're getting caught on video. Project Veritas, they're equal opportunity, but if you go to Project Veritas, you'll see videos where they're admitting to destroying ballots and stuffing ballot boxes, and they had a Canadian guy come in and they told him as part of this experiment to come in and he would cast ballots at 10 different locations, and they told him, well, your ballot's going to be disqualified because they'll know that you're a Canadian citizen, and he went ahead and did this, and they paid him, I guess, $300 a day to go do this. And he goes home and he's thinking about this, and he did a video about this. Why are they paying me to vote 10 times and vote a straight ticket? So we know that there's widespread voter fraud. We know that it's worst in cities like New York and Chicago. And so there's been a big effort underway to do things like voter ID, domicile. I don't think it should be a 30-day 30-day residency requirement. I think it should just be 10 days so that we can make sure that obviously college students and everyone are able to vote. College students have to be able to vote because sometimes they live here in New Hampshire, but if they live in Manchester or something and then they go to college at UNH, they can run into residency issues. And also a 10-day residency requirement is more defensible in court than a 30-day residency requirement. But I definitely believe we should have a 10-day residency requirement. I definitely believe in voter ID.
Oh, yeah.
To cut down, you need an ID for everything.
Well, that's right, yeah.
And they give them away free now at the DMV if you just need the voter ID.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I don't know. I can remember back in I want to say 80 or 84, I was a supervisor at Checklist. And we had a city council here in Concord who came into a registration session. He was just like a minute late because we had it from like 11 to 12 noon. And he had like 25 voter registrations that he wanted us to accept. And I said no. And he got very upset with me. And I said, no. I said, you're late. They're not with you. We have to verify them. And I said, no, I will not accept them. So he was very angry. I said, look, you want to do that? Go down to City Hall, let them accept it. And I don't care. And I guess they did not accept them.
This is another reason, I think, why we need third parties. Every other Western country has third parties. Now, the various personal freedom parties, the libertarian-like parties all around the world, they're minor parties. In other words, you only get a few people elected, but frequently getting a few people elected is just enough to prevent either the Labour Party or the Tories from having an out-and-out majority. And if you look at some of the ads that they put on, some of them are very clever and very interesting. They talk about bureaucracy and how there's too much big city bureaucracy and it's too hard for entrepreneurs to start a business and whatnot. Some of the other libertarian-like parties, but they get a handful of people elected. So you'll usually have a big government party, some type of conservative party, and then you have a libertarian-like party in the middle. And what it does is it prevents either party from getting an out-and-out majority where they can party leaders can just run the state government the way they want or run the national government the way they want. And of course, the rules on caucus. If you have one political party in the majority, right now it's the Republicans, but a couple of terms ago it was the Democrats.
Yep.
And they can develop the whole budget in caucus.
Yeah, of course they can.
And so right now you have Jasper and his cronies send the orders down to the Finance Committee and House Ways and Means Committee, and they send the orders down, and he basically develops the budget. So you have a handful of people, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people up there, up on the 3rd floor, making all these little deals, and none of it comes to light, none of it comes to sunshine. So if we replaced a few Republicans and Democrats with Libertarians, then you wouldn't have an outright majority for either party, and the budget process for developing the budget would be done out in the light. The other thing is, when there's elections fraud, if you had, instead of 3 Republicans and Democrats, if you had 2 Republicans, 2 Libertarians, and 2 Democrats, we could properly scrutinize, potential elections fraud, election cheating, and ethics violations. So you'd have, nobody could get away with violating campaign finance law and that kind of thing.
What irritates me, though, in New Hampshire is the Republicans don't want the passenger trains in here. Capital Corridor. Neil Kirk was so against it. He wants to get rid of the Rail Transit Authority. And oh, man.
See, I talked to some of the people who are involved in promoting that, and the issue's more complicated than it sounds. And actually, if you compare spending $1 billion on widening I-93, which we're going to have to do anyway, but cost of widening roads is enormous, versus the cost of adding rail is small.
Yeah.
So now the question is, can we get enough ridership, and can we get enough federal funding, and can we guarantee that we don't get cost overruns?
I think you will. I think the Capital Corridor, at least with Manchester and Nashua, Concord may be a little bit harder, but I think it would take eventually. But Manchester and Nashua, I think, are good locations at least to start that. I mean, the Down Eastern is doing very well coming from Maine down through, and the Amtrak through Claremont is going well.
But the Amtrak going through Dover, was it Dover? Not Dover, Durham. I've only been on that train, I think, once. And what I've been told by the students who use that is it's usually empty. And if you look at some transit options work well, but when you have a government-run, government-subsidized monopoly, whether it's transit, van pools, rail, high-speed rail, whatever it is, in Japan they work because the population density is high enough. And then you have, of course, the Baltimore to Boston corridor in the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic corridor, and that belt, there are lots of transit options, trains and buses and whatnot, and you always have people getting on them because the value of the land is so high you can't widen the roads, so it's just more practical to use trains. But when you start getting up to this area, we're kind of at that limit where do we have the population density trying to go from Boston to Concord to where we can have enough ridership to justify
Well,
it.
you've got to upgrade the tracks, number one. And that would help a lot because you've got but I don't know, they're just so against it. I was sitting there that day we had the meeting, the hearing, and I'm telling you, I would love to just about ask him, what is your problem? But he is just told, but we had 35 speakers from Nashua.
So I feel like I've got to give the libertarian answer on it. And it's that you let the marketplace work, but for things like transit, public goods, buses, van pool, things that kind of take people off the road and provide services for older folks and get people to their doctor's appointment and whatnot, I think that the answer in general is to offer the land at no cost to all these transit and whatnot, and to let them operate tax-free because they offer a public benefit, and then just let the marketplace work. The problem with the way the federal government has done it is they just assume that everything has to be a state-run monopoly, or it has to be a state-run service. And a lot of folks in New Hampshire are very weary of having the state step in and run things because there have been quite a few disasters over the years run by states. The Big Dig project down in Boston was a $2.8 billion project, and it ended up being $22 billion when you count all the prosecutions, interest, cost overruns, having to redo things, the cheap building materials. The things started falling apart before they even opened it. So.
I don't know. Now we got coming up the casino. The Senate bills are coming over to the House now, and the casino bill's one of them.
I think that
Two casinos.
I think that the casino bill's improved a lot. I think this is a better version.
But they've also got a case where they also got a bill where they're going to put them on. You can buy scratch tickets on your computer.
Okay.
Well, that ought to be interesting. Yeah, you can be able to buy your scratch tickets on computer, and well, that they're always saying addiction. Well, what in the heck is that going to be? I'll be addiction.
Well, we allow almost every addictive, gambling, drinking,
Yep.
cigarettes,
Oh,
all
yeah,
kinds of
of
things
course
are
it is.
addictive. So
That makes me mad when they say, well, gambling is addictive. Well, what the heck you talk about drugs and alcohol and smoking and all that? That's all addiction. I don't know. Bingo obviously is the king of it.
that was a funny thing I found at the hearing was that casinos, Democrats were split, Republicans were split, and I thought, well, at least libertarians will be on one side of this issue. Nope, libertarians were split too. Every political party. Then I talked to some Greens. We have a few Green Party people in New Hampshire. They're split on the casino issue. And I thought that's the strangest thing. So if you're a voter and you favor some type of casino, you really can't vote for or against it by voting party line. You have to ask every single legislator what their position is.
Well, I enjoy it, so. Well, we're coming to a close around town, and we've been visiting with Max Abramson from the Seabrook area, who's a past state representative and now in the Libertarian Party, and who knows what his plans are in the coming year, but hopefully we'll have you back again and talk some more about this stuff. So
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too there. That was like a wet noodle handshake, but that's all right.
No, that was a good handshake.
There
right
you go.
there.
That's better now. These wet noodle ones, gosh. Anyway, but thanks to my director there, Ian Marx, and we hope to see you soon. Stay safe, enjoy your Easter, and we'll be visiting with you all soon again. I'm your host, Dick Patten, for Around Town.